Welcome to you all again, and welcome to those joining us around the world. As we gather here for this weekend to reflect on Teresa's writings, and this weekend it's the book called Life. Over these 4 weekends we're going to look at each one of Teresa's main writings in the context of the 5th centenary of her birth. And you'll notice on the retreat programme, there were some people who suggested this to me, can't remember who now, but there's one of these meetings discussing things and people making suggestions as to what we should put on here. When it came to discussing these particular 4 weekends, people came up with these 2 questions to give the weekends a certain focus. And they are: what is Teresa's purpose in writing this book? And how can the reading of this book help us today in our lives of prayer? Now, I'm not setting out to directly answer those questions, but rather to keep them as a background or a focus, because they're for each of us to answer ourselves, but also we each have our own questions. We come with our own needs. But at the same time, they are good questions, and questions that give us a certain focus as we reflect on this book of Teresa's. As I said, the purpose of these weekends is to help with not just a reading of Teresa's writings, but what I would call the right reading of them. We can read her writings and yes, get a certain amount from them. But what I will be focusing upon is at least what I think anyway, but I could totally wrong, of course, what is helpful to reading these books correctly. Reading them in a way that we'll perhaps come to an understanding of them, and more importantly, profit ourselves by our reading of them. Or maybe another word I should use, and sometimes people find it helpful with Teresa's writings, is in terms of not so much reading Teresa as listening to Teresa. Because that's how her early readers heard her. Teresa wrote at a time when vast majority of people couldn't read or write. And in her convents and monasteries, when her books they were read out and people listened to them. And what she has written is what she would have given over and over again in her oral teaching. So we listen to her. So the first book, the book that we're considering this weekend, the book which we call Life, Vida. It's not a title that Teresa gave the book. She never gave it a title. It's a title that has been given more or less from the time it was written. And it's an appropriate title. Not so much that this is autobiography, though there's quite a lot of autobiography in it. Or even spiritual autobiography, which is a term often used about the book. Yes, it's that, but it's much more than that. What I would say is there's a book about life, about Teresa's own coming to life, coming to the fullness of life. We come back to that. To begin with, I need to begin by giving a certain amount of background to this book. Because books, and particularly Teresa's books, they don't just fall from the sky. They have a context. They have a story, a history. They have a life of their own. And this book has that. So, we are celebrating the 5th centenary of Teresa's birth in 1515. And she tells us at the end of the book of her life, the very end, she tells us that in the kind of accompanying letter at the end of the book, she tells us this book was finished in June 1562. So Teresa is 47 years of age. 47 years of age, of course, in those days would be considered far older than it would be today. Could probably add 20, 25 years onto it by life expectancy. So she has lived a lot of life by the time she writes this. However, when we read the book, we realise, of course, that it wasn't finished in 1562. This book was written twice. The first version of it was finished then, because when we read the book, we realise that there are events that have not yet taken place that she's written about, and not even Teresa herself could write about events that have not yet taken place. So this book has been written twice. The first version of it, the version that she refers to in that letter, has not come down to us. The first version of the book she wrote in 1562. She's 47 years of age. She has lived for 27 years in the Monastery of the Incarnation in Avila. And what might say about those 27 years that have brought her to this point of writing this book? Over those years, there are many struggles in Teresa's life. But the most fundamental of those struggles is around prayer. Teresa is a woman who wants to pray but can't. Or to put it another way, she cannot pray in the way that the experts are teaching her to pray. In those days you were taught how to pray. There were certain methods of prayer that were right, that were approved, that were taught. There were other methods that were dangerous and you could be led astray, and you don't go there. But she struggled to pray. according to the methods that were there. But, as she tells us, I was praying without knowing that I was. Or I was learning to pray without knowing that I was. She couldn't follow the methods, but she was learning to pray. But not only that, but she was having all kinds of experiences of prayer. And there were real signs that this woman was growing in prayer. But she lived at a time when there was a great fear of, being misled. Could be the devil. You could not only be misled herself, but she could be misleading others. There was that sort of culture of fear. And so she turned to what she calls these learned men, confessors, directors, theologians, for their help and advice. And initially, the first one, she turned to tell her, you're being misled, this is the devil, this cannot possibly be right. Even some who knew her well, whom she highly respected. But then, gradually, she found others who began to see the value in what she was doing and what she was saying. And it's out of that she begins to write. That's the kind of context in which Teresa begins to write about her prayer life. In fact, the first writings of Teresa's that come down to us are accounts written for her confessors, that they can then go and show to others and say, is this woman really on the right road or is she not? What also has begun to happen in Teresa's life is at the Monastery of the Incarnation, some sisters and some other people also are talking with Teresa, discussing prayer. People were coming to her for help. But out of these discussions also there emerged the idea of founding a community. Wouldn't it be good if we could found a small community that would live by the ideals that we're discussing, dreaming of? And so that idea is starting to emerge. And in 1561, there steps are being taken quietly, behind the scenes, with the help of some friends, to bring this about. And what then happens to Teresa is towards the end of 1561, she's ordered by her superiors to go to Toledo to stay with a woman who has just been widowed, Donna Luisa de la Cerda, who's heard about this holy nun in Avila, and she's so distressed at the death of her husband, she wants this nun to come and console her and accompany her and help her. And so on the face of this would appear to be disaster. She's been taken away to a different city and different place and out of her convent and into a home of a noble lady and all of that. But it is during those 6 to 7 months that she spends there in the home of Donna Luisa de la Cerda that she writes the first edition of this book of her life. The book, as I said, that has not come down to us. Then she returns to Avila in August. She said in June she finished writing the book. August she returns to Avila, and her community begins. It's about 6 months later she then moves from the Incarnation to her new community of San Jose. And so 3 years later, she's asked to rewrite the book. And as we don't have the first edition, we don't know how much of the first has gone into the second, but probably quite a lot, but undoubtedly the second one has so much more material, and particularly the account of the foundation of her first community, which obviously she couldn't have written before that. And everything. So a whole journey has taken place. She rewrites the book, or writes a second edition of it. And that is the book that we are looking at this weekend and reading and reflecting upon this weekend. A book that she finishes towards the end of 1565. But the book then has a life, takes on its own life. In that letter at the end, again, which is dated with the first, it was the book, she's asking one of those who asked her to write this, and probably the person whom the book is most addressed to, the Dominican theologian Garcia de Toledo. She's asking him, she's giving him the book and asking him to take it to the foremost theologian in Spain at the time, was now a canonized saint, Juan de Avila. Take the book to him, write it out himself first, so that her handwriting won't be seen, and take it to him and ask him to see, is this so? Of course, he doesn't do that. It will be years later before the book will get to Juan de Avila. There'll be a whole... When Teresa finishes the second edition of the book, gives it again to Garcia de Toledo, and it goes here, there, or goes all over the place. Eventually, yes, it does get to Juan de Avila. He gives a very strong approval of the book, and luckily he did, because he died shortly afterwards. But then, after that, the book falls into the hands of the Inquisition. We don't have time to go into the details of that now. And so for the rest of Teresa's life, since this book sort of is very much on her mind, she clearly does not want it to be lost. She wants to get it back. She wants others to see it and read it, but she won't get it back. Even though the Inquisition never condemned it, they actually approved it, but wouldn't release it. So it's a book that, since we might say, is the fruit of the first 50 years, 51 years of Teresa's life. Not so much an account of her life as the account of her coming to life. And its presence, its existence, and particularly its absence, will form a very important part of her life right to the very end. And why, we might ask, would that be? There may be a whole variety of reasons for it, but probably the most fundamental one is what she says to Father Garcia de Toledo here in this letter. But she says to him, that she's entrusting to him her soul. Do what you think is best. And remember, you are obliged to one who has so entrusted her soul to you. Her soul. I said she never gave a title to this book, but maybe that's as close as she's ever going to come to give it a title. Her soul. This is precious to her. And when we read this book, I think it's important for us to remember that. This book is an invitation to enter Teresa's soul. She's inviting us into the most intimate place within her. Probably more important from our point of view than that is that she's inviting us into her soul at the time of her life when there is greatest struggle there. Or she's inviting us to see the struggles of her life, her whole journey of human and spiritual growth and maturing from within, from the perspective of her soul, of that deepest place within her. So we need to read this book with a profound sense of privilege. We're in a privileged place when we're reading this book. Next thing I want to say in terms of introduction is that as we pick it up today and read it, we can find ourselves rather bewildered. I suppose initially of Teresa's 4 main writings, it's the most difficult book just to pick up and read. And there are a number of reasons for that. And it can appear to us maybe at first reading to be rather disorganized, scattered, jumping from one topic to another. We can get sort of almost bogged down in it. We can lose the sense of what's she doing here, where is she going to, what's happening here. It's a book that appears to be dealing with a whole number of subjects at different levels. The reality, of course, is that it's not that. This is a very carefully thought through book, very carefully structured. And if we're to read it well, we have to keep the structure in mind. And that's what I have put there on that sheet that I've given to you. I give a structure to this book, which will help us to navigate through it. And I'm just going to briefly run through it now and leave it, and we'll be picking it up as we go along over the weekend, and I'll be looking at various parts of this structure. But we need to keep the overall structure in mind if we're to read it well. There's a prologue and an epilogue, which most books would have. So I'll have a look at the prologue tomorrow morning. But the one thing we need to remember about the prologue for Teresa's writings, unlike modern writers, is that Teresa wrote the prologue before she wrote the book. Modern writers tend to write the prologue after the book is written. They finish the book, then you write the prologue. But in Teresa's time, Teresa, and presumably the common practice in her days, you write the prologue before you wrote the book. Just pick that up in the morning. But the structure of the book is such that the real beginning of the book, there's 40 chapters to this book. In a sense, we could say the real beginning of the book is at chapter 23. And I just put in here a little what she tells. A new book begins here. I should say a new life. And she tells us that the life she had lived up until now was her life. The life from now on was the life of Jesus Christ in her. Jesus is the life. Coming to life. Coming to the fullness of life meant for Teresa living the life of Jesus. He is the life. He is the life of the person fully alive. Of course, her thinking there is very much influenced by St. Paul, who profoundly influences Teresa. We could do a whole series on the way that Paul influences Teresa. But Paul's famous statement, it's no longer I who live, but Jesus Christ who lives in me. The I being the ego, the false self. But the new, free, liberated self, the one of Jesus living in her. He lives in her. That's the life. This is entry into the fullness of life. To understand Teresa, this maybe might be another way of to understand her. We have to remember that there's a before and an after in her life. Another way of putting it is that she has the mentality of a convert. It's not that she's a convert in the sense that we might use the term today, somebody who was maybe converted from one religion to another, or from atheism to Christianity, or whatever. That's not in that sense. It's in the deeper sense of the word. It is a person who lives a profound sense that their life has been changed. And life has been changed by meeting with Jesus Christ. That, of course, again is very much St. Paul. Before he met Jesus and after he's met Jesus, two different lives. Teresa very much has that. There was a before and an after. There was a decisive change of direction. Now, in the book of her life, there's a number of experiences that one could say are conversion experiences. We'll pick up on a few of those over the weekends. But more importantly than what experience exactly it was, it is the fact, her consciousness, that my life has been changed by meeting with Jesus Christ. Or my life has been changed by his meeting with me, would be the way she would. His coming into my life. Life has been profoundly changed by that. And that is what Teresa wants to write when she sets out to write the book of her life. The life of Jesus in her. Life after It has been fundamentally changed and transformed by Jesus. But Teresa realizes, of course, that she can't start there. So I have kind of done here, and this is, I suppose, a bit of my kind of interpreting of Teresa here. I've named 3 introductions. I think it probably, to see the first 3 sections of the book as introductions. Teresa doesn't do it in this way, of course, but it's just the way I'm putting it together here. Or 3 things we need to know and understand if we're to understand Teresa, understand her life. The first section, the first 10 chapters, is all about her early life, family, vocation, early years in religious life, beginning of life of prayer, crisis, struggles, conversion experience, at least the first of them. The Lord began to awaken this soul. So it is, since in those chapters there is a gradual awakening of her soul by the Lord, by Jesus. She's learning to pray. He is gradually coming into her life. He's intervening. It's a gradual to know Jesus. Awakening to his presence. So she's giving us there her story, in a sense. But it's as if then she realizes, but this story can't be understood if the reader doesn't understand what prayer is. There's no understanding Teresa if we do not understand what prayer is. No understanding this woman or what she's saying if we don't know what prayer is. We have to have a right understanding of prayer. And so she gives us what is sometimes called a book within a book. A teaching on 10th chapter, a teaching on prayer. And her famous her famous 4 means of drawing water, but look at that later. But it's just the fact that it's there is important, because she's saying to us, or she's saying to those whom she's writing for, there's no understanding me if you don't understand prayer. Prayer is her life, what she's searching for, struggling with, the priority in her life. And it's what has brought about this change that she wants to write about. It's change. It's brought about this change. It's prayer that has brought about the change that brings her to the point that she can see her life as a before and an after. But that's not enough either. Before she can get to it, then she gives a third introduction. A very important chapter for Teresa's writings, chapter 22. If you read no other chapter of this weekend, read that, chapter 22. For Teresa, she's... There was somebody one time and saying that Teresa is the most Christian of saints. You think, what's that mean? What does that mean? Surely a saint is a Christian, and surely they are all Christian, and how can you say that somebody is... But there is a sense to that statement. She is the most Christian of saints. But in the sense, what's meant by that is that prayer, if we're to understand prayer as Teresa teaches it to us, more fundamentally, if we are to understand Teresa, Jesus is at the heart of it. She even, when she changes from the convent of the Incarnation to San Jose, she changes her surname to Teresa of Jesus. Jesus is. For Teresa, it's just, prayer isn't prayer if Jesus is not at the heart of it. Life is not life if it's not in relationship with Jesus. We grow and we change through relationship. Teresa grows and changes, discovers who she is, her whole sense of identity through Jesus. And Jesus, human and divine. To coming now to the next section of the book, which I've entitled, that title I've put out, Life of Encounter with Jesus Christ. Or maybe another way I could have put, maybe I should, instead of putting of there, I should probably have put in is there. Life is encounter with, life is. Life, that's what life is, meeting with Jesus. So those chapters are a whole series of experiences of Jesus. Jesus in her life is profound, startling, challenging, at times very confusing, at times liberating, transforming presence of Jesus in her life. We're brought into that deep meeting place. We're really in her soul now. We're in her soul's struggles. We're in the struggle that's bringing about growth and transformation in Teresa's life. But Teresa being Teresa, it is never just about her. All of this has a purpose. Years later, 12 years later, when she'll write the Interior Castle, she'll tell us that the purpose of prayer is works, works, works. And here in this book, she'll go from this account to the founding of her first community, San Jose in Avila. And yes, she tells it the story in a sense like a historic story, but it's not history she's speaking about here. She's speaking about how this came about, and it came about in our own prayer life. Life gives life. Life begets life. People who are living bring life. The life that's coming from this relationship with Jesus is life-giving. It's a giving birth. Giving birth from that profound place within her. So in the overall cut of this book, it logically fits here. As for her, the work of founding was not her project, not her work. It was a work of God. It was as much a work of God as prayer. Yes, it involved all kinds of practical things and struggles and property and lawsuits and all kinds of conflicts, and everything, but it was a work of God. It was as profoundly a work of God as the deepest and most profound of prayer. Then after that we go on to another section. In a sense, how she's living now at the time of writing. After making this foundation, she's now living there nearly 3 years. Community is formed and growing. What is happening within her? And it's not since something new is now happening, but rather that she is going more deeply into what's happening. So in these last chapters, she's looking back over what she's written, looking at it from a deeper place. And these chapters, there's a sense that on the one hand something is coming to an end, but on the other hand we're at the beginning of something. If you look in the hallway in the other building over, just the bottom of the stairs, there's a painting there. There's a copy of Rubens' painting of Teresa and the dove. And it's a story that she tells here towards the end of the book of her life. But it's has often been called Teresa's Pentecost experience. There were Pentecostes in the New Testament. It's the end. The story of Jesus is over, we might say. Resurrection, ascension. But actually the story of Jesus is really only beginning. This is only the real beginning. Because the church, that's what matters, and the story of Jesus that goes on in our world. And there's that here in these last chapters, sense that something has happened, is completed, but actually we're only at the beginning of something. But we don't know what we're at the beginning of. Neither does Teresa know what she's at the beginning of at the time of writing here. Obviously, history will show that. But what I will do over these next sessions is I'm not setting out to explain all of this. Rather, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out things. I'll probably pick something at different times from each of these sections. They're like pointers to alert people, pointers to help with reading this, hearing it in the right way. That's enough, I think, for this evening.